This is Believe in Buckeyes. I'm Bryant with All-American Chimdi Chekwa, and we're talking recruiting today. As we know, the summer, what's about the midsummer now? It's officially July, about midsummer, but as far as recruiting goes and all the visits to your top schools, pretty much starting to kind of wind down, and with winding down comes commits, right, Tim?
Yep. Kids
Comes
starting to
commits.
starting to make those decisions. It's getting close. You know, when we played, you didn't report. You know, you reported maybe in the spring, at the start of the summer. Now these kids are starting in January, right? So they're about 6 months away from actually being at the school. So yeah, it's time to make that decision because during the season, you know, it's gonna be tough to continue to. I mean, there's no new information, right? They're finishing the visits,
Right.
so kids are making those decisions.
Yeah, that's for sure. And for Ohio State, we had a pretty good week, right? We got some D tackles locked down. We got Maxwell Roy out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He actually went to the same high school as Marvin Harrison Jr. So we're hoping we're crossing our fingers for the same tier player out of St. Joseph Prep. We have Teron Odom, D tackle out of North Carolina, and then also Brody Lennon, who plays the tight end position, who's out of Gates Mills, Ohio. So we got a couple big guys, man, a couple heavy-handed guys to kind of join the middle of the defense for this recruiting class. What do you think about those few names that I just called off, and how's that make you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to get the guys up front. It's always good to
That's
get
right.
the guys up front. I know we get excited about DBs, the receivers, what you need, obviously, but it doesn't work unless you get those big guys up front. So getting those D lineman commits are big. Obviously, we're still kind of crossing our fingers and hoping for some more guys on the offensive line as well. Specifically, one of the top recruits there. So yeah, welcome sight seeing some of those D linemen. There's other teams in the Big Ten, USC, to name names, have a D lineman commit. So that's not a good sign,
Yeah, that's right.
especially when you're looking at the future of your defense.
That's right. And let's talk about Coach Johnson for a bit. I mean, I feel like let's call it every year and a half, the internet is never coming from the facility. Around the internet, it's always time for Coach Johnson to hang it up. He no longer still has that juice. But somehow, he just keeps turning out guys. He getting 5-star DEs. He getting 4-star D tackles, guys from across the nation. He's still getting it done when it comes to recruiting. So, I mean, can we just give Coach Johnson the back, let him do his job, and when he say it's done, right? Are we okay with that?
I mean, I'll speak for the fans who question him year to year. I think the biggest thing is on-field play as opposed to just recruiting. But yeah, I agree. I think he's reached kind of legendary status at the defensive line coaching position. And I'm expecting him to bring those guys in and develop those guys and turn them into players that really have an opportunity to play on Sunday. So, yeah, I'm gonna give Coach Johnson his flowers continuously, and just I look forward to seeing those guys continue to develop under his tutelage. So.
Yeah. And just one quick shout out about Coach Johnson and his legendary status. If you want to know what makes Coach Johnson special, I'm an offensive lineman. Now, I played against Coach Johnson, some of his guys, when he was coaching at Penn State. And now I get to see how he developed our guys here at Ohio State. And what he does great, if you don't know, he takes these great athletes, right, these big star recruits, these guys that are big, fast, and strong, and he teaches these guys how to be fantastic with their hands. Right, he's just like it's kind of like machine work. It's his hands here, it's this, and how you get a hands off you, and how you turn that to hips, and to how you turn that to making plays into the backfield. He's number one in the nation at that job, and so Coach Johnson to me is having another fantastic offseason, and no surprise in my book, that's for sure. But but we need to switch it up a little bit. Obviously, Ohio State they've been killing the offseason, right? I mean, we're talking about guys returning to school, number one recruiting class in the nation. For 24, 25. They're just doing a lot of great things off the field when it comes to retaining players. But we lost a guy, man. We lost a guy, man. It's I'm trying to stop smiling. You know me, I'm a very joyful guy, but this is a very sad moment, man. We lost one of our guys, one of our Believe in Buckeye brothers here. One of your guys as a cornerback, defensive back. Dorian Brew decided to commit to Oregon.
Yeah, we lost Dorian Brew, and so to give like the full context of Dorian Brew, you have to start off with his mom. Donica Merriman, Ohio State graduate, legendary track and field athlete, someone who, won a lot of races.
Yeah.
And
100-meter hurdles. Yeah.
yeah, so starting there, Dorian Brew also, lived in Dayton, right? Went to Northmont High School. Just towards the end of the season last year, went down to, stay with his dad, go play at Conroe High School in Conroe, Texas, near the Houston area. But he was, he was he's a high level defensive back, a guy who has a size and length and ability to play corner and safety or nickel. So if you think about, that nickel cornerback position, he's probably a guy that could play first, second, and third down at that position where he could cover.
Right.
He also has the size to be able to come up there and mix it up, make tackles, seal the edge, whatever is necessary. So Ohio State has the number 1 ranked corner in Devin Sanchez in the nation. The number 2 ranked corner. You maybe could even flip those depending on who you talk to.
Right.
Naeem Offord come out of Alabama, and they almost had a chance to really have a clean sweep, man. And this one hurts a little bit because he's from the state, right? I know he's playing in Texas now, but he's from the state. He's from the state, and his mom is an Ohio State legend. So it was, it's a tough one. It's a tough one, especially to lose to a now in conference rival in Oregon and have to compete against that guy.
Yeah, that's definitely a tough one. I mean, I think this might have came out maybe last week, but I just seen Marion in a Right Road commercial for like Ohio State, right? And it's kind of like talking about legendary athletes with the current athletes, and like this just came out, right? And then we end up losing the guy to Oregon, and obviously it's not over, right? It's as you stated, it was an offer out of Alabama. He's still taking visits, right? He actually, I believe, on Dorian Brew's visit to Oregon, he was there as well. So things should kind of shake out, and I bring that to say that right now he did commit to Oregon, and that's great for the Ducks, right? But us Buckeye guys, me, Ohio kid, just hate to see it, right? I always talk about last year starting last year, basically since we lost to Michigan, building that fence around the state of Ohio, and obviously you lose a guy. I mean, he's a Ohio kid through and through. We lose a guy to Oregon here, and it happens. It makes sense, all right? I mean, if you put yourself in Dorian's shoes, they got the number 1 guy, they got the number 2 guy. And these guys been committed for a while. It's not like they committed before the summer. They've been committed to Ohio State for several months now. So you feel for them, right? You like, well, essentially, eventually, I got to do what makes the best sense for me. But you guys got to understand, it's like me as a fan now, it's like, man, I want my guy to come to Ohio State, but you kind of have to understand that there's a little bit more to it, right? Everybody's goal, I always kind of go back. Everyone's goal is to play in the NFL, and that has not changed with NIL. No one is receiving NIL funds. It's like, what, I'm fine. Like, I got NIL. I made some money in college. I'm good. Like, everyone wants to get to that top level, so sometimes you have to make a decision that assists you in that process. But I had to bring this up as well, though. I mean, we've seen this last year. I mean, we all recall it. Jeremiah Smith committed to Ohio State some time ago. But when it comes to the actual signing of intent, that didn't take place till around December, I believe. It was like November, December, somewhere in that time frame. Yeah. And there was some leeway, right? At that point in time, we lost a couple. I think we lost a cornerback or two. We lost some commits. And then it was a huge question: was Jeremiah Smith? He made his commitment. Was he actually going to sign his letter of intent to come to Ohio State? Because Miami had kind of came in and made a very strong pitch for him. And if you recall, everyone kind of remember this from last year. Ryan Day goes to the podium. He's about to address the media. They kind of talk about the offseason preparation. And then at that time, he's literally about to make his opening statement, and one of the reporters called out Jeremiah Smith signed. He signed. He actually said the paperwork came through, and he gives a fake fade and type of situation, just kind of joy that it actually kind of came through. I mean, that's the situation here now, right? I mean, we're talking about guys committing early, guys going to school in January, and kind of making that decision. But until I guess pens on paper, that letter of intent, things could still kind of shake up, right?
Yeah, I mean anything is possible at this point, and it's such a weird thing because as a school, this is what's challenging from a recruiting standpoint because we talk about this fence around Ohio, right?
Yeah.
Build a fence around Ohio. The best guys in Ohio stay in Ohio. But hold on, you get the top 2 guys in the nation. So now what happens, right? Because if one of those top guys is in Ohio, now it's like, is there still room for me? And even, it's not just that. It's also who do you prioritize, right? Because as Ohio State, if the number 1 guy on your board, and forget about what the guys are ranked, right? Say Naeem or whoever is the number 1 guy on their board, if they're just looking, right? But then you got a top guy in the state. How do you prioritize? And you got Trey McNutt coming up, right? He hasn't made a decision. One of the top safeties in the nation. He's probably I think the number 1 ranked player in the state, I believe. If he's not number 1, he should be, right? And all the reports are leaning towards him going to Oregon. So now you talk about building this fence. So you got this fence around the state, and there's a lot of guys from outside the state that want to get in. Like they're jumping the fence. So there's some guys in that fence that are like, look, am I the priority, or do I go elsewhere? And I mentioned Trey McNutt, and this is unique. To me, this is a very unique situation. You have 2 defensive backs, both legacy kids, where as we mentioned, Dorian's mom ran track at Ohio State. Trey McNutt's dad played safety at Ohio State. It'd be very weird to lose both of those guys who lived in the state, whose parents both were athletes at Ohio State, to go elsewhere, right? But at the same time, you got a top safety in Fahim Delane. You got two top corners as well. So I don't know. There's that build a fence around Ohio, but it's like, there's a lot of guys trying to get in that fence.
Yeah. But I mean, we gotta wait till it play out, right? I mean, because and obviously, me being an Ohio kid, I know I'm biased, and I always talk about it. I don't know. Everything kind of goes back to the Michigan game to me, right? Like, especially since we've been losing lately, everything is kind of revolves around that game. Because I know what we'll do for the rest of the season, but we got to be able to win that game. And obviously, of recent, we have not been able to win that game. Due to every reason, right? You get that Ohio kid, that game to me, it means a little bit more, right? And, you kind of understand what it means to win that game and live in your home state and how it reflects upon you 10, 20 years, 30 years down the line when people ask you, how did your teams fare out against the team up north? And, Naeem Alford, great player he may be, when he get done with Ohio State, he goes on to the NFL. He may never, settle back home in Alabama. He don't have to answer those type of questions. He might not have to kind of get into it. So with that retrospect, I always prioritize the Ohio kids, right? I always going to prefer Trey McNutt, Dorian Brew over number 1, number 2 guys in the nation. In my mind, you should be putting those guys first, and after you kind of make sure that you get them kind of locked in and lock and loaded, then you kind of go elsewhere. But we know that's me in the ideal world. It doesn't work that way. I mean, with Dorian Brew, I feel like, months ago, maybe a year ago, they was looking at him possibly committing to Ohio State. As in, obviously he still kind of stays in recruiting process as another guy's commit. So now things just kind of change. It doesn't work that nice and cut. It's not that clean cut and easy, but in my mind, in the ideal world, that's how it would go. We would get our Ohio guys first. Once we kind of secured our Ohio guys, we started looking across the nation and see who else we could kind of pull in to kind of help build up the class, especially if we're in need in certain positions. But it doesn't work that way. But that's how I would love for it to go. But
it makes sense. It makes sense. Like, I'm going to be honest. Growing up, I was an LSU fan through and through. I grew up in Louisiana before I moved to Florida. LSU didn't offer me, but if LSU would have considered, if they gave me like 80% scholarship, I probably would have went. and
financial aid, man.
I would have filled it up with like an academic scholarship or something. I would have ran track for the rest of my money or something. But I understand that level of passion and understanding of the tradition and the Michigan game, and that extra energy to carry it, because some of the team focus on beating Michigan and understanding tradition comes from the other players. Like, some of it comes from the other players. It can't all just be the coaches instilling this all, because some of those coaches don't even have the deep roots, right? So some of it comes from those local kids. And I do think in our ideal world, you get the best players in the state because they exist in Ohio, right? Like, it's different if it's Oregon. You know, we looked at Oregon's commits for 2025 class. They don't have not one commitment from the state of Oregon. Not one.
Zero.
And if we looked at their offers, I can guarantee you don't have that many offers within the state as well. So all these guys are coming from out of the state. And I mean, it's working for them, but if you have those guys in the state, you look at places like LSU and Louisiana, for example, they're going to be filled up with the Louisiana guys. I think there's a ton of Louisiana talent. They're going to be filled up with Louisiana guys. And some of those guys, like the running back that went to commit to Michigan, they're not going to stay because they got 2 or 3 of Louisiana running backs that are already committed. That's different than, what we're talking about, where there's a couple guys from outside of the state, and the guys inside the state looking out elsewhere. So I think that's ideal. I think that's Ohio State's approach. I think, but like you mentioned, it just doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah, that's for sure. But we gotta kind of focus in on Oregon, because, like you said, Oregon has 0 commits out of state of Oregon.
Yeah.
Looking at their class, they're ranked number 6 in class. So it's like, not like they're not doing a bad job at all. They're doing, tops of the nation. Most of the guys I say the majority of the guys are from California, which is kind of understandable, right? This is the closest state where USA is a very serious football state when it comes to high school. But then other than that, like, they got guys from all across the nation. You got guys from the South, Midwest, guys from the East Coast, guys from everywhere. And that's kind of how they're building their class. But I tell you what, Ohio State is going to have to keep an eye on that, right? I mean, we can't have, like, 2 of the top guys. I mean, obviously, like, right now, Dorian's kind of ranked as a Texas guy, and I that's everyone knows that's really not the case if you know football at all, right? He's been in Ohio for his whole life. And then you get, you start talking about maybe possibly Trey McNutt going to Oregon as well. Like, maybe a couple years ago, it's like, oh, that's kind of weird. Yeah. But okay, but we got to see these guys now. We got to see these guys. Like, these guys commit to Oregon. They're in the same conference as you. So you have to, be prepared to play against one of these guys or both of these guys if we end up losing them. And it's going to, I mean, like, it kind of matters, right? I mean, that's them going to Oregon, like, that's kind of a back end of it. Like, okay, I didn't go to Ohio State. I had to offer. But I'm going to Oregon now, so now when I play Ohio State, I still get my opportunity to play in the shoe. I'm just gonna have different colors on. I'll probably go out and try to show out in that game as well. Gotta watch out for that.
Yeah, it's something. You remember? We would play teams like Northwest, and Coach Tressel put this guy up, this running back kid. He's from Ohio, right? This kid right here, he's from Ohio. He was Mr. Ohio. He didn't get the offer here. He went to Northwestern. He's gonna play his heart out this week. Or you put up a Illinois. Tyrell Sutton, exactly. But they'll do that for all of these teams. Toledo, right? Playing random Toledo game. All these kids wanted to go to Ohio State. Imagine it was never a team with caliber of Oregon, right? It was never Oregon. Look, we have these high level players who grew up in the state of Ohio, but now they're in Oregon. Like, it was never that. And I think that's just a different level. And if you look at it, how's Oregon getting these types of players, right? Like, USC, like, why aren't they able to keep some of these guys in California? But then Alabama, kids in Alabama, got D linemen. We talked about Naeem Offord coming to Ohio State. We got a couple of Alabama's actual players transferring to Ohio State. And then you get kids from Ohio going out to Oregon, which is something that I'm not sure. We might have to look like in history and see how many Ohio kids went out and played for Oregon. And like, that's a new but Oregon being in the Big Ten, USC being in the Big Ten, now it's a direct competition in recruiting, and they're coming into the state saying, "Look, Ohio State got a bunch of players. There's some guys in the state that are now considering elsewhere. So they're continue to come into the state." And pick some guys off and tell them, look, leave that fence and come to our cookout out here. So It's just an interesting dynamic. But again, I'm hoping, that some of the best kids in Ohio can continue to stay here and go to Ohio State. 'Cause I do think it's important.
Yeah, and one more thing I had to shout out, let's throw this out here too, and this is very important. I mean, we just played this Oregon at the shoe, right? I mean, this is obviously, this is a handful of years ago,
Yeah.
and we didn't do too well. Oregon
No.
came to the shoe, and this was back before our defense kind of got things figured out. Let's kind of put it like that, lightly, nicely. But they kind of came in here and they played well, and I mean, it's not like we lost that game pretty handily. Like, they kind of came in and handed it to us. So Oregon has a lot of confidence in the state of Ohio. And obviously, they showed it on the field, and now they're showing it in recruiting. Like, they feel like they definitely belong here in this new Big Ten. That's for sure.
Yeah, how much did that win do for them for recruiting? Like, to go into Ohio State, win, and show all these kids in the Midwest, that we can compete with Ohio State, we're gonna compete with the Big Ten in the Big Ten country. I think that did a lot for them in recruiting. But I don't want to talk about that game. I really don't want to talk about it. I went to that game.
I was there too, man.
And it was one of the most frustrating defensive performances that I've seen out of Ohio State. It's probably only second to maybe that national championship game against Alabama.
Yeah.
It was such a bad defensive performance. It was one of those games where I'm sitting in the stands. I see the formation. Oregon's at like the 35-yard line, and I'm like, they're about to run this ball for a touchdown. Oh my God, they're about to run this for a touchdown. If they snap it and run a sweep outside, it's going to be a touchdown, and it was a touchdown. So that was just a poor performance on defense. I don't expect to see anything like that.
Yeah, no, we got
ever
that
again. It might be 100 years before we see something like that happen again. So I don't want to bring that game up anymore. But I do think that benefits them in terms of being able to come into Ohio and recruit some of these some of the top talent.
Yeah. So let's real quick though. So now we're talking a lot about recruiting. We're talking a lot about Oregon, right? And I mean, historically, this has been Ohio State's conference. I don't think Oregon's going to come in and just kind of change that overnight. The Big Ten still belongs to Ohio State when it comes to us having the top guys. Us always competing for, to win the conference and go on and throughout college football playoffs, national titles, things of that nature. I don't think that'll change. But that number 2 spot. I mean, obviously Michigan, did well under Coach Harbaugh, and they was able to win a national championship, put an asterisk on that national championship. We know they had some extracurriculars going on. But it's kind of time is kind of changing. Do you think, especially looking at recruiting, I think Michigan is, I don't know, they're in they're tops in the nation, but they're not in the top 10. I think they're like maybe in the top 20, 25 regarding recruiting. But in a handful of years, can you see Oregon kind of just moving in and solidifying themselves as that number 2 team in this conference and kind of move out teams like the Michigans or the team you love to get on, Penn State, and kind of move them aside and take that spot over?
Penn State is like in purgatory. Like they're like forever going to be a second tier. I talk about Penn State all the time because it's so disappointing to me. Like they're forever going to be a second tier Big Ten football team. Like good enough to compete, but not good enough to actually win. Oregon for sure is going to be 1-2 Ohio State in Oregon, and depending on the year, depending on the transfer portal decisions, depending on things here and there, it's going to be up for grabs. Who's 1 and who's 2? I think Michigan has a little bit of setback, ends up being in second tier for a while. I think Michigan has a chance every few years to pop back out. To pop out and show them, in the words of Kendrick Lamar, like they have the opportunity to pop out and compete. In the same sense, I think there's going to be some other teams like that as well. But I just think USC just really struggling to put a defense together. And I don't know, under Lincoln Riley, as good of an offensive coach as he is, I don't think they ever take the next step. And I think Oregon, as long as Lanning is the head coach at Oregon, I think they remain at the top, and obviously Ohio State remains at the top, and it's a 2-headed monster in the Big Ten. And the reality is Oregon is doing it in a very different way, where they're getting guys all over the country and nobody from inside the state. And their brand, the Nike brand, everything that's kind of been developed really recently in like the last 20 years or so, right before Chip Kelly, and then Chip Kelly kind of took it to the next level.
Right.
I think we continue to see that for the foreseeable future. I don't see a different scenario.
Yeah. Yeah. To be honest, I'll just be frank. I just have to agree. But before we wrap up, real quick, we're down. It is July, and I've been waiting for it. I know you've been waiting for it. The world's been waiting for it. This new NCAA video game to come out for college football. So we're down to a couple weeks on that. Right now, they have Ohio State ranked as the #1 defense in the game. Overall, we're ranked #2, right behind Georgia. So I mean, obviously, we took a little disrespect with the what's it called, the previews or whatever.
Yeah.
But a little bit of respect there, right? So I mean, that's respect.
Yeah, so a little bit of respect. I gotta get back in the game, playing video games, man. I got married and I got away from it.
Oh
And,
man, the married life and kids.
Yeah,
Did that make you busy or something? I don't get it. I don't understand.
Yeah, it really doesn't make sense. I should have been prioritizing video games this entire time. So I'm gonna make sure I do that. Put my foot down. Make sure that it's wife, video games, kids, and third. Get my priorities in order.
Get your priorities together, man. Yeah, and I'm just gonna leave it at right there, man. And that's our show for this day. We end all our shows with an OH.
IO.
Go Bucks. We catch you guys here soon.
Go Bucks.